How do measures of the stock market affect the standard of living? In our society, we constantly play up the stock market. When you watch the news, stock prices slide along the bottom. One of the select 20 apps that come pre-installed on every person's phone is stocks. We seem to have an obsession with these fluctuations of far-off corporations. But how important are they really? What I've found is the correlation can be rather ambiguous. According to Business Insider, there is a rather consistent correlation during slow economic growth, like under the Bush administration. But otherwise, it can be rather wild. In fact, during the 80s, he found that occasionally there was a negative relation between the two. Though this is likely just a symptom of the recession of the early 1980s. It is certainly something important to consider. This graph from Macro Trends shows the ratio of GDP to Dow Jones score. A 1 would be perfect correlation, and it rarely hits that number, and until rather recently, it wasn't even close. I think that more accurate statistics may come out, or when more accurate statistics come out for 2020, this may change, as our GDP has dropped drastically due to the virus, while the stock market has seen record growth. I think this really shows just how far removed GDP is from the stock market, because this pandemic has absolutely decimated our GDP. Well, despite the stocks initially going down at the beginning, they have more than recovered and have completely bounced back. According to CNBC, the Fed has found absolutely no correlation between the S&P 500, another measure of the stock market focused primarily on the performance of the top 500 companies in the country, and GDP. This is rather telling that the largest economic power of the country cannot find a correlation between the stock market and economic growth. In another study conducted by Business Insider, they found that there is almost no correlation between economic growth and expected return of investment. On the graph above, expected return in a variety of countries is mapped up in yellow, and economic growth is mapped out in purple. While rate of return varies wildly, the growth in GDP is rather consistent. This calls into question many basic assumptions about investment return. Overall, from my findings, there is little evidence pointing towards a positive correlation between measures of the economy like the Dow Jones and GDP. One major limitation here is the accuracy of data. There are countless measures of the stock market, and many of the popular ones only measure it with American companies. Others, like the Hang Seng Index, measure companies in Hong Kong. With all these metrics, the correlation could vary between them. Another concern is some of the sources use data dating back to the 1940s. Due to its age, this may not be entirely accurate. Despite this, I think the sources provide usable data. In order for my findings to be correct, I would have to see the stock market recover far slower than it is currently during this recession, the GDP to more closely follow the stock market. As currently we have seen really high escalations of the stock market, and it's gotten back to normal, while our GDP is still trailing at the lowest it is, even though it is growing very fast. After looking through several graphs and reliable economic sources, I've come to the conclusion that there is little correlation between the stock market and economic growth.